So, I'm going to talk about Dr. Phil.
Even though I've never met her in person, she's with me in really weird subliminal universe ways. I talk to her in my head.
Big Joel, the bloke from the channel Big Joel, made a video called The Cult of Dr. Phil that I watched last night and I found it really interesting. The video was basically a critique, I'd say, of Dr. Phil himself based off one episode of his show. I don't want to repeat too much of Big Joel's own points because his video does that, but to kind of provide context, Bailey was a girl suffering under the delusion that another girl called Jasmine, who she'd never met, was her lover, and she was obsessing over Jasmine and wouldn't leave her alone. But the video was about Dr. Phil himself, and as someone who had heard of Dr. Phil but never watched the show, never seen any clips of it before, I found it an eye-opening video and kind of horrifying when you think there will be people who watch Dr. Phil thinking that's what therapy looks like minus an audience, or maybe even therapists in training who think Dr. Phil provides a good example to learn from. He does not. The two main ones Big Joel points to, and I watched the clips of this episode myself afterwards as well, are one where Dr. Phil asks Bailey to clarify her feelings and leaves a very judgmental pause for effect that sort of feels like a prompt to the audience, and Bailey responds with a bit of a melodramatic call.
It's the love story of the century, but you've never physically met.
No, sir. And y'all can laugh at me, it's fine. I will be your spectacle. I will be your laughing spectacle.
And this moment prompted Dr. Phil to quickly end the interview and have her escorted off the stage, claiming his show's not about melodrama, it's not about making a spectacle of her, but trying to offer help.
That's not what I'm about, that's not what I do. I had you come here to help you.
But as Big Joel pointed out, that's not strictly true, when this is a show where you have an audience right there who have been laughing and cheering throughout the episode before this point, and Dr. Phil leaves a pause that feels very much for television and audience. Before this moment, we've even seen Phil laying into her a little insensitively for someone in his role.
Because you may live in Fantasyland, but I do not.
Absolutely.
I mean, the first moments of their exchange in this conversation are really weird, because I imagine if I was invited on a show like this, I'd feel a bit nervous. There's an audience right there who are all geared to be on Dr. Phil's side of everything. That would make me uneasy. If I had delusions and he was likely to rip into them on stage, I'd be very uneasy. If I'd suffered horrible traumas he was likely to talk about and write up on a board in front of me, in front of an audience, I'd feel incredibly uneasy. She still agreed to come on, of course, but you would naturally feel a little bit on guard, and Bailey seems to have a strange relationship with her biological mum and didn't want her to be on the show with her, so the first thing Bailey says when asked how she is,
I was told that y'all brought someone here that I explicitly said not to bring.
Yeah, who's that?
My biological mother.
Which obviously isn't how it works. She can't tell them what to do or not to do, but her anxiety is understandable. Phil McGraw, you'd hope, could talk about that anxiety or why she doesn't want her mum there, exploring that for a quick moment while gently reinforcing that her mum is there and that's how it is. But instead, he goes off into a weird rant, referring to Bailey as entitled several times, and then bringing in the producers to help gang up on Bailey a bit about the rules, which seems needless and a bit domineering. And then once he has shut the interview down and speaks to Bailey's mum instead, he starts off ranting again about it.
Snotty, entitled way, like, my mother's not supposed to be here. Well, are you kidding me?
Snotty and entitled are a really strange choice of words, I think, that probably convey something about Phil McGraw's feelings more than Bailey's, I think, here. He's told her he's going to help her, but attacking and mildly ridiculing someone's delusions isn't likely to break the delusions. If anything, just reinforce them further and turn yourself into another figure who's against Bailey in her mind. Which gives her more reason to shut down and shut off everything that might question her perspective. Because delusions and things like this are a defense mechanism on some level. Yes, I think that's clear. However, people employ defense mechanisms for a reason. People have them because they feel a threat. They feel the defences are needed as a matter of survival, and that to be stripped of those defences kind of threatens a psychological death, I could say. Which is why attacking the delusion, as Phil does throughout this interview, not just in the clips I've shown, isn't likely to work. You'd be better off trying to help them feel safe and secure enough to be able to let their defences go, rather than taking a battering ram to them, which obviously requires an amount of time you can't fit into a quick episode of a show. And Phil says he doesn't like Bailey playing the victim. And whilst on some level it is probably true she is playing up to some of the melodrama and everything, but Phil has just ridiculed someone he's supposed to be helping, turning her into that victim, where he and the producer and the mum are all ganging up on Bailey. As a result, she does end up coming out of the exchange very much like the victim, where Phil's the one who appears snotty and entitled.
I apologize that I offended you in any way, shape, or form. That was never my intention.
Well, you certainly have. So, Christopher, if you'll take Bailey
The
off.
fact that dynamic occurs, I think, says something very telling. And how can he possibly be offended? He must know how counselling works. I mean, clients often are quite defensive and feel on edge about the work to begin with, and they will make demands or criticisms or all sort of things that it's important not to get wound up by. I know it's fictional, but think, for example, what Will does in Good Will Hunting to Sean when they first meet, and all of those kind of provocative attacks. And then here's Phil McGraw getting offended and going off on a kind of punitive rant because she said she was uncomfortable about her mum being there. It's mad. Big Joel points to the idea that that's the setup of the show. Phil has to be right, true, the good doctor at all times, and anything that threatens his credibility needs shutting down, which I agree with. That is the setup of the show, but I've done enough of vaguely saying similar things to Big Joel now. I guess I wanted to talk more about the public perception of what therapy is, and I guess the dangerous tendencies of wanting to attack and humiliate those with mental health issues, because on that point, my view of Phil McGraw as kind of doing the opposite of anything that would help Bailey isn't an entirely greed one. And I imagine there's a lot of people out there who are very positive about Dr. Phil's work. But for example here, Big Joel's video made reference to a Reddit post called "Does anyone else think Dr. Phil should apologise to Bailey?" And there are top comments there suggesting no, he shouldn't. She was so unhinged and bent on making a scene, it was good for him to sternly make her follow the rules. Nope. Tough love is sometimes needed, and this girl was in cuckoo land. I don't necessarily think apologising to her is the right thing, and I agree there might be a level of manipulation in what she does, but just the idea of it being good to shoot her down and show tough love and all these things is interesting to think about. There's a hint of annoyance towards Bailey in these comments, not anything massive, just a touch, but I guess I also think about my first Good Will Hunting video, which analysed the first therapy scene, which, whilst there are lots of positives in that scene, I made the point that Sean grabbing Will's throat is most definitely not a good thing. It's unrealistic. If it did happen in real life, you'd be struck off, and rightly so. Physically attacking your client, especially when that's a client who has a past of physical abuse, is not a good thing. But there are a lot of comments on that video arguing it was good of Sean to show Will who's in charge, or to assert the boundaries, or that this is Boston and violence is the only language Will would understand, and a similar point in favour of tough love, let's say. I mean, don't get me wrong, tough love is a good thing in many, many circumstances, maybe less commonly in therapy, but I'm not saying tough love is bad. I'm saying tough love can be an excuse for doing things that aren't helpful and are kind of punitive. I mean, we know the setup of the show. We know it sucks us in and is designed to have us see Phil as right and benevolent, and if any people disagree with him, then they're wrong and we should be against them. And Bailey is delusional. Will in the film Good Will Hunting is a cocky, provocative, annoying sods in the first therapy scene. So the idea of, say, giving him a smack to put him in his place, or of putting Bailey in her place with some stern words and ridicule, could be appealing. And then you've got the excuse for being able to put them in their place by saying it's tough love and it's for their own good to justify that, and you can see very quickly the danger in that sort of approach, and you can imagine what that might lead to. Bailey, as she is here, this is 2 years ago now, but Bailey, as she is here, has mental health issues that need help, not attacking. I think when people do have strange issues that we don't quite understand as common knowledge or seem baffling to us, people can be annoyed by them and sneer or laugh and go, she's in cuckoo land, and kind of attaching some of our own personal anger and relish to shoot these people down the way like you wish to shoot down opposition in a heated political debate, for example. People can do that kind of thing happens, and it's not helpful. Certainly not if you're supposed to be some figure of healing. Look, I don't mean to criticise everything about Phil McGraw and his show. I think there are some good bits in the clips I've seen. I think it's good they offer people proper therapy after the show, and I have only seen the clips of this one episode, so it's not fair for me to judge the entirety of the show or Phil himself on the basis of one exchange. I know that, but it's still very interesting. And I know also Phil McGraw's not suggesting he is doing any kind of therapy here, but you know, people will naturally watch this and take away an impression of what therapy is or how a therapist should behave from Phil's example, and that's problematic. Like, I remember being young and depressed and needing counselling, and I remember how nervous I was about going for the first time, and I think if I'd seen this show and had an image of this lodged in my mind, thinking this is what counselling would be like, I'd probably never have gone and never got the help that made a huge difference to my life. Phil doesn't really strike me as someone interested in healing so much as someone interested in rooting out the truth, the correct answer, and being able to say, here's what the problem is. The truth can be important, but most of the time, what does it achieve in terms of helping someone? Like, what your client feels is the real stuff to work with. Their feelings, not the rational truth surrounding them, because half the time they're aware of the rational truth, or it's their emotions that are the reason they've blocked it away. And like, people know, for example, people might find themselves saying, it's ridiculous I keep getting into abusive relationships, or it's ridiculous I drink to feel better. Sure, they probably know that, but it still keeps happening. What's being told that it's ridiculous by a doctor going to achieve there? And even giving someone a diagnosis, I guess, for something. It's good to have a diagnosis and to hopefully then have measures put in place around it, but you know, like being told the truth of your condition, I don't know, being diagnosed with depression doesn't solve depression, does it? But Phil seems to be about proving he knows the truth and the problem like it's as simple as a problem. That makes him look very clever and esteemed, gathering all these people together like Poirot gathers up suspects and then tells them who the murderer is. That's TV. I'm not talking just about Phil. I mean, that's how TV is. He has to look good and he has to look like he sorted everything out, and if he can't sort everything out, it's not his fault, it's the guest's fault for being difficult. I've got to be honest as well, I was absolutely dying with laughter when I first watched some of the clips for this episode, because I forgot just how over the top American reality TV is. You've got someone talking about very serious mental health issues and they drown out all the seriousness with an insane amount of sound effects and transitions and just editorial nonsense.
My whole life changed the day I met Jazz because she's the most spectacular woman I've ever met. It's
no wonder people forget these are real human beings. The editing turns it all into a cartoon. How do I wrap this up? I don't know. I think I just wanted to say the majority of the time therapy does not look like Dr. Phil. It's not about judgment, attacking. weaponizing psychoanalysis or giving you some answer. It's about the fact sometimes problems don't just get solved with an answer. Sometimes the human heart is more complicated and you have to sit beside the client and go on a journey with them. You explore their feelings with them, help them to find their way through it. Therapy is a place of acceptance, and I know I don't speak for every therapist in the world, and I know a lot of you will have had bad experiences with therapy. I mean, I get a lot of comments talking about terrible experiences people have had that make my jaw drop, because I can't imagine any trained counsellor ever doing some of the things some of you have said. So I can't speak for those therapists, obviously. I know there's lots of different trainings and approaches, and sometimes routes that require very little training at all in some places to be able to practice. And those things worry me. But don't let examples like those put you off taking a step that could be very helpful if you feel you might have a need for counselling. I think that's what I wanted to end on. Actually, Phil McGraw, the setup to always be right, I should say more about that, because the counsellor is never always right and should never try to be, because that's when you start missing important things. Stuff will go wrong in therapy. Your counsellor will do things that annoy you at times, possibly upset you. There'll be ruptures, because a counsellor is human and will get things wrong, or you will. That's every relationship ever. The difference is the counsellor will go away and reflect on the session and what happened, and they'll think, I should have done this differently, or I think I missed something important there, that's good to know for next time, or whatever it is. You know, half of the job is thinking back, noticing all the things you failed to grasp during the session, or reflecting on why things might have gone a bit wrong, if they did go wrong, so that the next session you can work towards repairing the rupture. I think the counsellor has to be in a position of awareness where they expect to get things wrong, not to be forcing the idea that they're right all the time and that they're the good doctor and always know best, because they won't be. That's all I wanted to say for this one, though. I don't quite know what this video is. I'm not sure if it's a response to Big Joel or adding something on to what he said, or if it's just an analysis doing the exact same thing he did but slightly differently. And I feel slightly uncomfortable criticising someone, but what he's doing in his TV show just doesn't sit right with me. Yeah, these are my thoughts. They're always just my thoughts. Comment if you disagree or think I'm stupid, or you do agree, or whatever else. Like if you liked it, subscribe if you want to stick around, support me on Patreon if you want even more, but otherwise, hopefully see you next time. As ever, special thank you goes to Devin, David Kling, Darren Burdock-Latter, Kestrel, Gay Hitler, Incomplete Sentience, Samara Southey, Sharakov2814 and Joshua C. Bollier. Thank you.